There's a specific kind of silence that hurts more than an argument. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't come with slammed doors or raised voices. It comes in the form of a message notification. This year, I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving. No confrontation. No explanation. Just a carefully worded family group chat message that read, "We're keeping Thanksgiving small this year. Just immediate household." Immediate household. I stared at the words longer than I should have. Because I knew what they meant. They didn't mean space was limited. They didn't mean the house was too small. They didn't mean scheduling conflicts. They meant me. And what makes it worse is that exclusion rarely feels like a mistake. It feels intentional, polite, strategic. For years, I had shown up. 6-hour drives. Expensive wine. Homemade desserts. Smiling through subtle comments about how I worked too much, how I wasn't married yet, how I was so independent. I laughed it off. I played my role. I never missed a holiday. Until this one. What they didn't know was that 2 days before that message arrived, I had signed final closing papers on something they couldn't even imagine. A 9-bedroom estate overlooking a private lake. Marble floors. Glass walls. A dining table that could seat 18 people comfortably. $6 million. While they were deciding I didn't belong at their table. I had just purchased one of my own. And something inside me shifted that day. Not anger. Not even revenge. Clarity. Because sometimes, being left out isn't rejection. It's revelation. It shows you exactly where you stand, and exactly what you don't need to beg for anymore. They thought they were shrinking the guest list. They had no idea they were expanding my perspective. And this Thanksgiving? I wasn't going to ask for a seat. I was going to build the entire room. My name is Camila Hayes, and for most of my life, I've been the one who didn't quite fit at the table. Not because I wasn't loved, but because I didn't follow the script. I was the one who moved to the city instead of staying close to home. The one who skipped safe careers and built something from scratch. The one who worked holidays if it meant landing a contract. The one who didn't marry young. The one who didn't need rescuing. To my family, that translated to one word. Different. After college, while my cousins were settling into predictable jobs, I launched a tech consulting firm from my tiny apartment. I slept 4 hours a night. I pitched clients who didn't take me seriously. I reinvested every dollar I earned. No safety net. No financial backing. Just discipline and quiet ambition. It took years before the numbers became impressive enough to silence the jokes. But even when my company crossed 7 figures, even when I bought my first luxury car, even when business magazines started calling, at Thanksgiving, I was still the career girl. The one who brought expensive wine instead of a boyfriend. The one who arrived alone. And yet, I never missed a holiday. 6-hour drives. Early mornings. Long conversations I didn't always enjoy. I helped in the kitchen. I cleaned afterward. I listened to subtle comparisons between my brother's stable life and my busy one. I smiled through it. Because family mattered to me. Which is why that group message felt heavier than it should have. We're keeping Thanksgiving small this year. I reread it 3 times. My brother and his wife were included. My cousins too. Even relatives who barely attended before. But me. Silence. No call. No explanation. No "we'll miss you." Just absence. And for the first time, I didn't rush to fix it. I didn't ask why. Instead, I looked around at the closing documents sitting on my kitchen counter. Paperwork for the estate I had just purchased. 9 bedrooms. Private lake. Grand dining hall. And I realized something slowly, steadily. Maybe I had outgrown the table I was trying so hard to stay seated at. And maybe this wasn't rejection. Maybe it was transition. The first night I stepped into the estate as its owner, it didn't feel real. The gates opened slowly, iron curling into elegant patterns, revealing a long private driveway lined with maple trees. The house sat at the end like something out of a magazine. Tall white columns, glass walls reflecting the lake behind it, soft golden lights glowing from within. $6 million. And it was mine. I walked through the front doors alone. The foyer ceiling stretched 2 stories high, a chandelier casting light over marble floors that echoed beneath my heels. The silence wasn't lonely. It was expansive. For years, I had lived in motion. Meetings, negotiations, flights, presentations. I rarely paused long enough to absorb what I had built. But standing there, in the middle of that grand open space, I felt something settle. Proof. Not for my family. Not for social media. For me. The dining room was what caught my attention most. A custom oak table centered beneath floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. 18 chairs. Perfectly spaced. 18. I ran my hand lightly over the polished surface. For so long, I had driven hours to sit at someone else's table, shrinking myself slightly, answering the same questions, tolerating the same assumptions. Now, I was standing in a room built to host more people than my family ever had. And suddenly, the exclusion didn't sting the same way. It felt small. I walked into the kitchen, marble island, professional-grade appliances, space designed for gatherings, not limitations. That's when the thought appeared. Not revenge. Not pettiness. Choice. If they were keeping their Thanksgiving small, I didn't have to spend mine alone. I could expand. I could invite differently. I could create a table that didn't come with subtle judgment or conditional belonging. The estate wasn't just a house. It was space. And space meant freedom. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about who had excluded me. I was thinking about who deserved to be included. And that shift. That was the real beginning. House with flower sparkles. I didn't text my family back. I didn't post anything dramatic. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I opened my contacts. For years, I had poured my energy into people who showed up for me in quiet ways. The mentor who helped me land my first corporate contract, the assistant who stayed late during a brutal product launch, the neighbor who checked on my house while I traveled. People who weren't obligated to care. But did. I scrolled slowly, thoughtfully. Not everyone deserved a seat. But many did. I started with Olivia, my first employee. She had worked for me when my office was just a corner of my apartment. She believed in my company when the bank didn't. "Are you doing anything for Thanksgiving?" I asked. She laughed. Honestly. Frozen pizza and Netflix. "Cancel it," I said. "You're coming to dinner." Next was Mr. Kaplan, my retired neighbor. His wife had passed the previous year, and holidays had become painfully quiet for him. "You're not spending it alone this year," I told him gently. Then my former professor. 2 close friends from the city. A single mom I'd met through a business event who mentioned she hadn't been home for the holidays in years. The list grew. And something strange happened. Instead of feeling rejected, I felt intentional. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about building something. Within 48 hours, 18 seats were filled. Not with obligation. Not with people who tolerated me. But with people who respected me. People who celebrated growth instead of questioning it. As confirmations rolled in, I stood in the dining room again, looking at the table that had felt too big just days ago. Now it felt perfect. That's when my phone buzzed. A cousin had seen the closing photo of my estate, posted by the realtor. "Wait, you bought that house?" I smiled slightly. Yes. And this year, I wasn't asking for permission to belong. I was choosing who belonged with me. And that realization, that was better than any invitation. Once the guest list was finalized, I didn't hold back. If I was going to host Thanksgiving, it wouldn't be a reaction. It would be a statement. I hired a private catering team, not flashy, just refined. A seasonal menu with rosemary turkey, truffle mashed potatoes, maple glazed carrots, and a dessert spread that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel lobby. Fresh florals were delivered the morning before, deep burgundy and ivory arrangements lining the table. Soft gold candle holders spaced evenly between plates. Personalized place cards handwritten in elegant script. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted intention in every detail. The house transformed over 48 hours. Warm lighting replaced the cool overheads. A string quartet was scheduled for early evening, subtle enough to blend into conversation. The fireplace would stay lit. The lake outside reflected the autumn trees like a painting. It felt elevated, but not cold. Alive. That's when things started shifting on the other side of town. Someone had reposted the realtor's closing announcement, a photo of me standing in front of the estate with the caption, "Congratulations to Camila Hayes on securing this stunning $6 million property." I hadn't even shared it myself. But my phone began buzzing. First a cousin. "Wait, you bought a mansion?" Then my aunt. "Oh wow, that's impressive. Are you hosting something?" I didn't answer immediately. Because this wasn't about responding quickly. It was about responding calmly. Finally, my mother called. Her voice carried that soft, careful tone. "We didn't realize you had plans this year." Plans? Interesting word. "I do now," I said simply. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And for the first time, I sensed something different. Not dismissal. Not condescension. Awareness. They were starting to see that the quiet one at the end of the table had built her own. The calls didn't stop. Once the photo of my estate started circulating, curiosity turned into calculation. By Wednesday afternoon, my brother finally called. His voice carried that casual tone he uses when he's trying to sound unaffected. "So, I saw the house." It's big." "It is." There was a pause. Then the real question. "Are you hosting Thanksgiving there?" I leaned back against the marble kitchen island, looking out at the lake. "Yes." Silence. "You didn't say anything," he added. "Neither did you," I almost replied. Instead, I kept my voice calm. "You didn't ask." Another pause. "So, who's coming?" "Friends. Mentors. A few neighbors." I didn't list names. I didn't justify the choices. He shifted slightly. I could hear it in his breathing. "Well," he said carefully, "if you have extra space." There it was. Not an apology. An adjustment. It wasn't about whether I was welcome at their table anymore. It was about whether they were welcome at mine. And suddenly, the dynamic had flipped. For years, I'd been the one driving to them, fitting into their traditions, accepting their tone. Now, they were asking. Not demanding. Not assuming. Asking. "I thought Thanksgiving was small this year," I said evenly. He exhaled softly. "Camila." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the defensive one. I felt steady. "This year," I said calmly, "I'm keeping it intentional." He didn't argue. Because he understood what that meant. Intentional means chosen. Intentional means earned. When the call ended, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt balanced. Because this wasn't revenge. It was perspective. They didn't exclude me out of cruelty. They excluded me out of assumption. And now, they were realizing something. The quiet daughter. The independent sister. The one who always came alone. Had built something far beyond their expectations. And for the first time, they weren't sure where they stood. Thanksgiving morning arrived with golden sunlight pouring through the glass walls of the estate. The lake was calm. The trees were deep shades of amber and crimson. Inside, the house hummed softly with preparation. Kitchen staff moving efficiently, candles being placed, music testing in the background. I stood at the end of the long dining table, adjusting a place card slightly. Camila Hayes, host. For years, I had been the guest. The extra chair. The one fitting into someone else's atmosphere. Today, the energy was mine to set. Guests began arriving just before 4. Olivia came first, eyes wide as she stepped into the foyer. "Okay," she whispered, looking around. "You've officially leveled up." I laughed. Shoes off, wine to the left. Mr. Kaplan arrived shortly after, dressed carefully, holding a pie he insisted on bringing. When he saw the lake view, he stood silently for a moment. "This is beautiful," he said softly. "So are second chances," I replied. More guests filtered in, Hugs, laughter, warm coats being hung near the entrance. The house, which had felt massive days earlier, now felt alive. No one made subtle comments about my relationship status. No one asked when I planned to slow down. No one compared success like it was a competition. They simply celebrated. The string quartet played lightly in the background as conversations blended together. The dining table filled exactly as I had imagined, 18 seats occupied, not by obligation, but by appreciation. As everyone took their seats, I stood at the head of the table. "I'm thankful," I began, "for people who show up, not out of tradition, but out of intention." There were nods, smiles, glasses raised. And in that moment, I didn't feel excluded. I didn't feel replaced. I felt established. Because sometimes the real blessing isn't being invited somewhere. It's realizing you've built a space no one can remove you from. And just as dessert was being served, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Unexpected. The headlights lingered at the end of the driveway for a few seconds before slowly moving forward. Conversation inside continued, laughter, forks against plates, soft music in the background, but I had already noticed. I recognized that car. My father's. The vehicle came to a stop near the front entrance. The engine stayed running for a moment, like whoever was inside wasn't fully sure they should be there. Olivia followed my gaze toward the window. "You expecting someone?" she asked quietly. "No," I replied. I walked toward the door calmly, not rushed, not flustered. The house behind me remained warm, alive, glowing with intention. When I opened the door, the cool autumn air brushed against my face. My parents stood there. Not dressed for hosting. Dressed like guests. My mother held a covered casserole dish, the same one she'd brought to every Thanksgiving for years. My father kept his hands in his coat pockets, posture stiff but uncertain. "We didn't want to interrupt," my mom said softly. "You're not," I replied evenly. There was a pause, not dramatic, just human. "We saw the lights," my father added. "And we thought maybe." He didn't finish the sentence. For the first time in my life, they looked unsure around me. Not dismissive. Not critical. Unsure. I stepped aside slightly. "This year," I said calmly, "I wanted it to feel intentional." My mother's eyes softened. "And are we?" She didn't finish either. Intentional means chosen. Intentional means considered. For years, I had asked silently to be included. Tonight, they were standing on the other side of that door. And I realized something important. Power isn't slamming the door. Power is deciding how to open it. I moved back fully. "Come in," I said. Not because I needed validation. Not because I wanted to prove anything. But because I had built something big enough to hold grace. And as they stepped inside, into the warmth, the laughter, the life I created, I saw it clearly in their faces. This wasn't about a house. It was about who I had become. When my parents stepped inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around them instantly. Candlelight reflecting off marble floors, soft music floating through the air, the sound of genuine laughter. For a moment, they just stood there, taking it in. Not just the estate. The atmosphere. Mr. Kaplan was telling a story near the fireplace. Olivia was laughing with one of my old professors. The table was still full, dessert plates half finished, wine glasses glowing in golden light. This wasn't stiff. It wasn't competitive. It wasn't performative. It felt easy. I took my mother's casserole dish and placed it in the kitchen. When I returned, my father was standing near the dining room, studying the long table. 18 seats. All filled. "You did this yourself?" he asked quietly. "Yes." No exaggeration. No boasting. Just fact. He nodded slowly, as if recalculating something in his mind. My mother leaned closer to me. "We didn't realize," she began. I looked at her gently. "I know." And that was the truth. They hadn't excluded me to be cruel. They had underestimated me. There's a difference. Olivia walked over and introduced herself warmly. Mr. Kaplan shook my father's hand. Conversation flowed naturally, not awkwardly. No one asked why they hadn't invited me earlier that month. No one needed to. The shift wasn't loud. It was visible. For the first time, my parents weren't looking at me like the daughter who worked too much. They were looking at me like a woman who built something solid. Something stable. Something intentional. And as my father finally took a seat at the table, not at the head, not in control, just present, I realized something quietly powerful. Respect doesn't come from explaining yourself. It comes from building something undeniable. And tonight, nothing about this was deniable. Dinner had long transitioned into that comfortable stage where people loosen up. Shoes were kicked off near the fireplace. Jackets forgotten over chairs. Conversations split into smaller circles, some laughing loudly in the living room, others speaking softly near the kitchen island. My parents had stayed. Not out of obligation. Out of choice. I watched my father standing near the glass wall overlooking the lake. The water reflected the house lights like scattered gold. He had always been a practical man, the kind who valued stability, tradition, predictable paths. For years, I knew he quietly worried about me. The daughter who took risks. Who left home. Who didn't settle. He never said it directly, but I felt it in the questions. Is your business stable? Are you sure that's secure? What's your backup plan? Tonight, something in his posture was different. He wasn't analyzing. He was observing. You built all this from your company? He asked when I joined him. Yes. No partners? No. No family money? I smiled softly. No. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. You always seemed so sure of yourself, he admitted quietly. I let out a small breath. I wasn't, I said honestly. I was disciplined. That made him look at me differently. Discipline is something he understood. Across the room, my mother was laughing with Olivia, asking her how we met. For once, she wasn't comparing lives. She wasn't subtly measuring success in marriage timelines or grandchildren. She was listening. That shift mattered more than the house. For years, I had tried to explain myself in small ways, through updates, achievements, invitations. But explanation never changed perception. Presence did. Proof did. Not flashy proof. Consistent proof. When dessert plates were finally cleared, I stood near the dining table again, the same table that once felt too big. Now it felt grounded. Full. Earned. My father approached me again, hands in his pockets like earlier, but this time less guarded. We didn't mean to make you feel left out, he said quietly. I believed him. But belief doesn't erase impact. I know, I replied. But sometimes being left out shows you where you really stand. He absorbed that. And where do you stand now? He asked. I looked around at the people still laughing in my living room, friends who had supported me through failures, mentors who challenged me, neighbors who showed up with kindness. I stand exactly where I built myself, I said calmly. That wasn't defiance. It was clarity. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was trying to earn my place in my own family. I wasn't trying to prove I was successful, or worthy, or complete. They saw it. Not because of the estate, but because of the woman standing inside it. And that realization, that was worth far more than $6 million. By the time the evening began winding down, the estate no longer felt like a statement. It felt like home. The fireplace burned low. Soft music played in the background. Guests lingered in relaxed clusters, exchanging stories and making plans to meet again. The dining table, once perfectly arranged, now held empty plates, wine rings, crumbs, evidence of a lived-in moment. And somehow, that made it more beautiful. I stepped outside onto the terrace for a breath of cool air. The lake was still, reflecting the house lights like quiet applause. Behind me, I heard the door slide open. My mother. She stood beside me, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. You look peaceful, she said gently. I thought about that. For years, holidays left me slightly tense, preparing myself for comparisons, subtle remarks, that feeling of being admired but not fully understood. Tonight, I wasn't bracing for anything. I replied. She was quiet for a moment before speaking again. When we said we were keeping Thanksgiving small, it wasn't about pushing you away. I didn't interrupt her. It just felt easier, she admitted. You always seemed so busy. So independent. We thought maybe you didn't need it the way the others did. There it was. Not malice. Misinterpretation. Strength can look like detachment from the outside. Independence can look like distance. I did need it, I said softly. I just didn't need to beg for it. She absorbed that carefully. I see that now. And for the first time, I believed she did. Inside, I could hear my father laughing, really laughing, at something Mr. Kaplan said. It wasn't stiff. It wasn't forced. It was genuine. My family hadn't come tonight to evaluate me. They came uncertain. And they stayed aware. That was the difference. Later, as guests began gathering coats and exchanging hugs, Olivia pulled me aside. This feels different, she said. It is, I replied. Are you going to keep hosting? I looked around the living room, at the mix of people from different chapters of my life blending effortlessly together. Yes, I said without hesitation. Because this wasn't about replacing my family. It was about expanding my definition of it. As the final guests left and the house grew quiet again, I walked back to the dining room alone. 18 chairs. Some slightly out of place now. I ran my fingers lightly along the table's edge. For years, I had measured belonging by invitations. By whether someone saved me a seat. But tonight taught me something permanent. Belonging isn't given. It's created. It's built through consistency, courage, and self-respect. They didn't invite me to their Thanksgiving. And for a moment, that hurt. But if they had, I would never have realized how much space I was capable of holding. This house wasn't the victory. The money wasn't the victory. Even their changed expressions weren't the victory. The real win was this. I no longer needed to shrink myself to fit into rooms that felt too small. I built one large enough for everyone. And from now on, anyone who sits at my table will be there by intention, not obligation. That's what $6 million bought me. Not status. Not revenge. Perspective. Holidays have a strange way of revealing things. They don't just bring people together. They expose dynamics, patterns, unspoken hierarchies. For years, I believed belonging meant being invited, being remembered, being included, having someone save you a seat at their table. And when that invitation didn't come this year, it felt like rejection. It felt personal. But here's what I've learned. Exclusion isn't always the end of something. Sometimes, it's the beginning of clarity. When I received that group message saying Thanksgiving would be small, I felt the sting. I questioned myself. I replayed conversations. I wondered if I had become too distant, too focused, too independent. But independence isn't a flaw. It's strength misunderstood. We often assume the person who appears strong doesn't need warmth. The one who is successful doesn't need reassurance. The one who built their own life doesn't need to be invited. That assumption is wrong. Strength still feels. Success still hopes. Independence still values connection. The difference is this. Independent people don't beg for space. They build it. And that's what this Thanksgiving became. Not a reaction. Not revenge. Not a flashy display of wealth. It became a redefinition. I stopped asking where I fit. And started deciding who fits with me. There is power in that shift. Because when you stop measuring your worth by someone else's invitation, you free yourself from their limitations. My estate is large. Beautiful. Expensive. But the real luxury wasn't the marble floors or lake view. It was choice. The choice to gather people who show up without competition. The choice to create warmth without tension. The choice to extend grace instead of resentment. When my parents stood at the door that night, unsure whether they belonged, I understood something quietly profound. For years, I had stood in that same uncertainty, waiting to feel fully seen. Now the dynamic had changed. Not because I demanded respect, but because I embodied it. Growth doesn't scream. It settles. It's calm. grounded, unshakable. And once you reach that place, you realize something liberating. You don't lose when you're excluded. You lose when you shrink yourself trying to be included. This year, I didn't shrink. I expanded. I expanded my table, my circle, my perspective. And in doing so, I didn't just host Thanksgiving. I rewrote what it meant for me. So if you ever find yourself left out, overlooked, uninvited, underestimated, don't let it convince you that you're less. Let it show you where you've outgrown. Because sometimes the door that closes isn't rejection. It's redirection. And sometimes the most powerful move you can make is not forcing your way into someone else's room, but building one so strong, so warm, so intentional, that people knock on your door instead. And when they do, you'll open it not from need, but from strength.